welcome back to Learning Stitches. This is lesson number 9, and we are using Jeanette Douglas's book, Learning Stitches. I am using banding to do some of these practice stitches on, and I know a lot of you are as well. Some of you might be using linen, and that's okay. I'm using a single strand thread, which is a flower thread on the teaching part, and on the part that I do at the end, it's some sulky thread, so it's a pearl number 12. So, and I think I've used some floss down there too, and you can really use whatever you want. I chose a single strand because I thought that would be easier to illustrate the stitches with, but you can use whatever you have in your stash. This little course was meant to be kind of stitch from stash, and so if you're stitching on a piece of linen and you want to know how to do a finishing stitch, I will show you a hem stitch at the end, so, and maybe a four-sided stitch. I'll show you a few different ways you can finish off your edges. I'm using something that's about 4 inches wide, and of course we covered this in the first video, and this is the 9th one, but for those of you who might just be jumping in, you can definitely go back and watch the earlier videos. But I'm using a 4-inch banding, and I am actually teaching you on a 21 count banding, which I don't have any more of. This banding comes from Vopla and Hallenbeck in Germany, and of course with the pandemic shutdown of borders and flights and things like that, and just businesses shut down, we've not been able to get any more of this. So a lot of you have 28 count, which is also fine, and it ranges from 27 to 28 count, just because these are bandings are made on looms that are, you know, like 250 years old. So I may put a couple of videos on for you at the end of this so you can see some of those looms in action. We went there last February, Allie and I did, and picked up a lot more banding. And by the time this video airs, you will have seen an update to our banding availability on our website. So I will have updated that, and you can go out and order banding if you're just joining us. That'll be fun. Okay, so I wanted to show you today, I'm using a hoop that's not the one that I normally use, just because I pulled it out to use it with a different project. And so this is still the same kind of hoop. This is the small oval hoop, and it is really my favorite hoop for just about everything, just because I like how small it is. And I've kind of got big hands, but I like the way my hands fit around this, and I like that it fits into different project bags and all kinds of good stuff like that. I especially like it for this banding because of the way the banding fits on it. As you can see, it's almost, you know, kind of straight, not exactly, but pretty close to straight on that. I wanted to show you because this one is not wrapped. The one that I use on an everyday basis is wrapped with twill tape. And the twill tape helps the hoop grip the fabric better. And so it gives you a tighter fit. You can pull the fabric a lot tighter around a hoop that's wrapped. And so I really prefer all my hoops to be wrapped. But I wanted to show you this today because on the oval hoops and the square hoops, this is not true on the round hoops, but on the ovals and the squares, you'll see a number here. And this one happens to be 83. And I don't really know what the numbers mean. You know, like why this one's an 83 and one might be a 91 or whatever. That's a good question I'll have to ask the distributor. But what I do know is that this hoop, because it is rounded, you know, in this oval shape, this is the way it fits together. This is the way it was made when these numbers line up. And so if you're using your hoop and you want a good tight fit, line up your numbers like this. I usually keep my screw down here because I want it out of my way. And I'm right-handed, so my thread's usually coming from over here. And so I have mine over here. If you are left-handed, you want your screw probably over here. You know, whatever works for you. But this is the way that I do mine. So once you wrap this hoop, you won't be able to see this inner number. And I only ever wrap the inner hoop because that gives me enough, you know, tightness. You won't be able to see this number. And so what I do, not on the inner hoop, is I start my twill tape at the number. And I wrap around the hoop and I end it right there. And I actually use a piece of colored thread to end this off. Which makes it look a little wonky because there's no way to do neat stitches when you're ending off your twill tape and you're kind of sewing it together. And I've done a couple videos out there of it, so you can go watch the videos of that. But that tells me where the number is on the inner hoop, and that's why I do it that way. Because once you've used your hoop for a while, it'll bed in, and you won't be able to see the beginning and the ending of where you wrapped it. So if you want to know where this number is on a round or a square hoop, this is the place to start your twill. and end it with a colored thread that you can see later. And you end it on the inside of the hoop, not on the outside. So you want to end it on the inside here. And you just do a few little tacking stitches here, and it's all done. But you can go out and take a look at that video. I just wanted to remind you of this since I was actually using this hoop today this way. Okay, so I'm going to get the hoop set, and I'll be right back, and we'll get started stitching on lesson number 9. Okay, we're back and we're ready to stitch, and we are on page 24 with the broken Hungarian, which is block 9 of our Learning Stitches sampler. The way that we've been doing our banding, or the way that I've been doing it, you may have something else going on, is I've left 4 threads between each band. So if you look at one of these earlier ones, you'll count right there. You can see that there are 4 threads between there. And I want to continue that. So I want to start 4 threads underneath the lowest point of this band. And when I look at the pattern, if I find the starting point and I count up to the ending point of the tallest point of the motif, there are 4 threads there. So, and the way I figured that out is I looked at the center point, which is the broken part of the Hungarian stitch, and that long stitch in the center is 3 threads. It covers 3 threads. So each block is 2 threads. So that stitch covers 3 linen threads. And then I noted that my starting stitch is 1 thread below that. So that means that my motif from the beginning point until the tallest point is 4 threads. So backing into that, that means that I want to skip 4 threads down from this and then another 4 threads for my starting point. And that means that when I get to the top highest point of that motif, which is that broken stitch in the center that covers 3 threads, the end of it will be 4 threads away from the tallest, longest point of this band above it. So let's test that out and try it. And I'll be honest, I messed that up the first time and had to take it out. So we'll see this time how we go. Okay, so the pattern of this little motif, it's a pretty straightforward motif, but it's really beautiful and it has a lot of opportunity to do some beautiful things. It covers 1 thread. And then I hop down and I cover 3 threads. And you'll notice, as I mentioned, that I started with an away knot down here, a waist away knot. It's long enough for me to rethread my needle when I'm done and run it under if I don't get it covered. Okay, so the second leg of this stitch is 3. 1, 2, 3. So it's 1 thread below, 1 thread above the starting stitch. And the next one is 5. Also 1 thread below and 1 thread above the starting stitch. And we can count on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. Now the next one is the broken part of the Hungarian stitch. And so this is just another form of a bargello or kind of a satin stitch. These long stitches are all kind of satin stitches. So the broken legs are 3 threads each. So I'm going to count up 1, 2, 3 threads and go down. Then I'm going to come back up, skipping a thread, and count up 3 more threads. 1, 2, 3. Okay? So that's the tallest point of that motif. Now we'll see when we get over here if we were right, because we didn't start beside a full stitch from above. Okay, now the next stitch starts to decrease in height, and it's 5 threads long. And so I come up a thread from where I started before, and I cover 5 threads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now with these stitches, it's important that you're always going, top to bottom, because we're moving down the linen. So when we do bargello, we've probably talked about this before. When we do bargello, the direction in which your stitch goes should be opposite of the direction in which you're moving on your fabric. And that's so that most of the time, and you may not be able to do it all the time, but most of the time you're going into a hole that is clean or empty. Clean hole, dirty hole, occupied, empty. You can set however you want. But you want to be starting, sorry, I said that backwards. That's so that most of the time you're coming up in a hole that is empty. And if you're having to go through a busy hole, something that has thread in it already, it's one you're going down into. And that helps minimize the opportunity of you picking a thread or splitting a thread when you're going through there. Because most of the time you don't really want to split threads in this kind of work. It weakens the longevity of the piece over time. Okay, so the next one covers 3 threads, 1, 2, 3, and the last one covers 1 thread. And that's the little motif completed, and it's just that straightforward. Tiny little thing, really pretty. When you throw a lot of changing colors on here, it gets really beautiful. Okay, so if I'm following Jeanette's pattern, between each of these little motifs, she skips 4 threads. So that's what I'm going to do. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I start, in the same row that I started the last one. I cover 1 thread. I drop down a thread. I cover 3 threads. And really I'm not counting, right? Because I know I'm going 1 below and 1 above. So I'm really just making sure that my starting point is right. Okay, and then this next one, it covers 5 threads. Now this one for me is directly below the band above. So this won't be 4 threads because it's not the tallest point, but we'll check the tallest point here in a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then the next one is going to be the broken part. So I come down 1 thread and I cover 3. 1, 2, 3. I skip a thread and come up, and I cover 3. 1, 2, 3. Now let's count. Okay, so this is the end of this. I broke the tip on my little laying tool. Sadly, it was wooden and it was very thin, and I broke it, which is actually why I really like my metal ones, which is called the BLT, the Best Laying Tool. I love it. I do use this for a lot of other things, but so anyway. So if I count threads, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I start underneath this, which is the longest point, the lowest point of the band above, which I wanted to have 4 threads underneath. Struggling with that there. Okay, so this is the longest one from above, and I want 4 threads before this band starts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm spot on. Okay, so sometimes you might have to take it out and start again, which I did, but I got it right, and that's all that matters. Okay, so now this motif again is going to start to decrease in size. So this next little stitch is going to cover 5 threads, and it's 1 thread lower than the starting and stopping point that I just did. The next little leg covers 3 threads. 1, 2, 3. And if I'm going too fast for you, I apologize. I think if you watch the other videos and kind of work your way up to this one, you'll kind of get in the flow of all the counting. And then this last little guy just covers 1 thread. So you can see it starts to take shape. It's really pretty. Now I'm going to skip 4 threads. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to do this again. So I'm not going to make you watch me do all this, but I'm going to finish going across, and then I'm going to come underneath and I'm going to start with another color. So I will be right back with you. Okay, so I made it to the end of my row, and I just wanted to show you, and mine and yours may be different because you may be on a 28 count, or you may have started a little bit differently. When I skip the 4 threads here to start my last stitch, I only have room for 1 leg because I've got a 1 thread margin that I'm keeping here. And I put it in, and it didn't look so great because it was just odd sitting there all by its little self. Usually we put the compensating stitches in, but just 1 stitch like that looked a little sad and lonely. So I took it out. So I'm not going to put that last little leg in. But if you've got more than a leg, even if you don't finish the stitch, if you've got at least 2 or 3, I would put those in. So I just wanted to point that out on mine because that's kind of one thing I'm changing. And, if we put beads in between these or stitches with beads, then that'll take up some of this room and it'll look a little bit more symmetrical. So I'll be right back with the next row. Okay, so my next color I'm going to use is the red. I'm just following in the same stuff that we've used before. You can see that I've rolled up my banding here and used one of the little peels. We've talked about the peels before, but they're really great. They come out of the quilting world, and you can buy them in packs of 12 from us, and they're great to kind of keep your fabric out of your way. Okay, now if you look at the pattern on page 24, you'll see that the next little motif falls between these two, and it's a little bit offset. So from my little stitch that I made over here, this very first one, if you look at the book, you can see that we skipped 3 threads between this one and the end of the next one. And the next, the compensating stitch, it's really a compensating stitch if you're following this pattern exactly, is also 3 threads long. So that means I want to start 6 threads below. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm still keeping that the 1 thread margin on the left. So let's see if this works out. 1, 2, 3. My stitches, 3 threads covers 3 threads. There should be 3 between. 1, 2, 3. And there is. So that's good. And then so to finish out this little compensating stitch, it covers 1 thread. So it's really kind of the outer edge of this one, only underneath. Okay? And you know, you might want to tighten up because this is a good example of why I wrap my hoop, because this one's not wrapped. I'm having to pull it to tighten it. Okay? And then I want to skip 4 threads just like before. 1, 2, 3, 4, and start the next one. And you can see this little guy is right underneath the leg that has 3 stitches. Okay? Just like this one lined up over here. So it covers 1 thread, same as before. You drop down a thread to start, and this one's going to cover 3 threads. 1, 2, 3. And if that screw on yours bothers you, flip it to the other side. Drop down a thread to start, and this one covers 5. You see, it's just a repeat of what we did before. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see why I like this small hoop, because I'm using my hand on the back. I'm kind of, you know, feeling the thread, making sure I don't get any loops or knots back there. I drop down a thread and I cover 3. 1, 2, 3. Skip a thread. This is the broken part, and cover 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Okay? Now we start to decrease this little motif. So you come up a thread and you cover 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you come up a thread to start and you cover 3. 1, 2, 3. You come up a thread and you cover 1. And you'll notice that your spacing between your first row and your second row is consistent, right? So when we counted this stitch over here, the very first stitch, we kept 3 threads between us. 1, 2, 3. You're going to have 3 threads between every stitch. So if I come over here and I count at the end, 1, 2, 3. Up here, 1, 2, 3. So that's how you know you're in the right spot. You don't want to be kind of off center, because then it'll look a little wonky. Well, maybe you do. You might do it that way intentionally, and that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to skip 4 threads to start the next one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's important. Make sure you stay on the same row. And I always take my needle and kind of track it over. I cover 1 thread, drop down a thread and cover 3, down a thread and cover 5. Oop, got a loop-de-loop. Now, you've probably seen me do this before, but when you get a little tiny slip knot like that, the way to get rid of it is to put your needle through it and just kind of pull it. And it gets it almost out, and then you just take your fingers and wrap it underneath and pull the thread, and it's gone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if that doesn't work, then you have to fiddle with it a little bit more, but usually that works. Okay, the next leg is the broken one. 1, 2, 3. Skip a thread. Maybe. And then 3. 1, 2, 3. Now I can feel on the back at this point that I'm catching my away knots, and that's okay. It's just less running under I'll have to do later. Okay, so now I'm going to start to decrease the size of this motif. So this next one comes in a thread on top and bottom, and it covers 5. The next one comes in a thread and it covers 3. And then the next one just covers 1. So You can see this is very repetitive, it's very meditative. You actually don't even need to look at your pattern once you get the spacing set up. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I start again. Okay, I'm not going to make you watch me all the way through, just like we did before, but I'm going to finish this one, and then I'm going to do the third row of this across, and you know, it starts out kind of the same way. It's 3 threads under, so it'll be centered up with this guy here, and I'll count down 1, 2, 3 threads, and then I'm going to count down the whole 7 threads, right? Because I'm lined up with this broken part, which we know covers 3 threads, and a thread in the middle. That's 7. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So to make this line up right, I'm going to count down 1, 2, 3 threads. That's the ending point. Then I want to count down 7 more to start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would be the center point. So you can start there if you want to, and then go out both sides. You can come over here, and you can follow the pattern in the book, and you can just count down 3 threads. 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to be doing a little stitch that's just 1, so you count down 1 more, and you start right there. So I'll probably do it this way. Okay, I'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and you'll see that I have taken care of my away knots. I went ahead and clipped that knot off the front and ran them under on the back just because they were kind of getting in my way at this point. And so for my start, we kind of talked about it before. I'm basically repeating this first row, and there are 3 threads between each stitch of each row, you know, from the first row to the second row to the third row, 3 threads between. So that means that I can come underneath this leg here and count down 3 threads, skip those 3 threads. My first stitch is just going to cover 1 thread, just like this one did. So that means I need to skip 1 more. That makes it 4 threads for the starting point. So your starting point for the third band is 4 threads underneath that stitch from the last band, right? And you'll be okay. So let's try it. Just make sure that is what, oops, didn't do a very good job anchoring that thread. Let's redo that. Okay, so let's count again. I had to re-anchor my thread, and I started this time with an away knot, which means I'm going to stitch over it. I did have it ran under up here before, but you can see it pulled right out. So not always the best way to start these specialty stitches. So I'm going to come down 1, 2, 3. That's my margin, and then 1 more for the length of the stitch that I want to cover. I cover 1 thread here, and then it's the same motif again. I'm expanding by a thread on each side, so the next one's going to cover 3. So I come down a thread to start, up a thread to end, and that covers 3 threads. Come down a thread, and this one's going to cover 5. I'm going to count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you're in doubt, just count. And you should count every once in a while just to make sure anyway. And then this middle leg is a broken stitch. 1, 2, 3. Skip a thread and come back up and cover 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, then we start to decrease the size of the diamond. So you come up a thread, cover 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You come up a thread and cover 3. 1, 2, 3. And then the last little leg covers 1, just like before. And you can see I've maintained my 3 thread margin between everything around it, and you can count those to be sure. 1, 2, 3. So we're good. So I'm going to skip 4 threads and do that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to cover 1 thread, and so I'm going to carry on across. So I'm going to finish this row and then come back, and we'll talk about what we want to do next. Okay, so I've finished the 3 rows of the broken Hungarian stitch. Now, if you look at Jeanette's pattern, she put beads between these, and she put a little cross stitch underneath the bead, then put the beads. And I'm going to do that when I flip to the other end. You know how we always do 2 ends. This is kind of the pure stitching part, and then on the other end we'll decorate it and do some fun stuff. On this one, I think what I'm going to do is alternate maybe some cross stitches with some French knots, or maybe just some French knots, because I think it's a good chance to show you, to remind you how to do French knot. And so let's start with that. So I have rethreaded my needle with a green variegated floss, and it's actually a flower thread. So to do a French knot, this is how I do it, and it works for me. You come up, in the center hole where you want to be, and I'm right-handed, so if you're left-handed, you're going to do this the opposite way. You grab that thread and you keep it kind of taut in your hand. You need both hands to do this. And you take your needle and you put it underneath this thread. And you see I'm making it pretty taut. So, and I come around my needle twice. I do 2 wraps. And I kind of keep that pulled kind of tight. I mean, your needle has to move through it. And you go back down now. This is where everybody gets messed up. They get messed up. They go back down through the same hole. On this big count linen, because it is a 21 count, and we've done these before on here, you'll see that the way I'm going to do this, it might not look exactly centered. But if you're on a higher count linen, or on an Aida, and you go over a few threads on Aida, it'll look fine. And it'll look good enough on here. If you go through the same hole, most of the time you can make this work. If you've done a lot of French knots, you just need to kind of keep this thread here taut and pull your needle through it. You can't keep it tight because your needle won't go through, but taut. Pull your needle through it and still hold it kind of taut as the thread goes through, and then you let it go right at the end. But the easier path is to go through one thread over. So when I go back down, I actually jumped up a thread. And that gives me a little anchor point for this. Now, I still go through the same process. I still hold this thread pretty taut, not tight, because your needle has to pass through. Then I pull the needle through on the back. Okay? So I'm going to hold that kind of tight. We'll see how this goes. And you do have to let the thread go at some point, but you kind of try to keep it. And so there. So it's fine. Now, if you yank real hard, you'll make it flat or yank it out or something, but don't do that. And so you'll see we really can't be exactly centered on the way this guy is laid out. You're kind of a thread off anyway. But let's do it again. Okay? So you hold it kind of taut, you wrap it twice, and you go back down. And I'm going down one thread above, right? And I'm holding this pretty taut. Pull the needle through. And you do have to let go of it. Just go on faith there. And you see I was very ginger with it. I did not yank that at the end. This is not a pulled stitch. I left that knot laying on top. Okay? So you see where I'm coming out at. I'm coming down because, to make this perfectly centered, I'd have to split this linen thread. And I don't really want to do that because I need to anchor across that thread anyway. So I'm coming up a thread below. Again, I'm grabbing my thread, I'm pulling it kind of tight, I'm wrapping it twice, and I'm going back down. Can you see one thread above? Oops, that's over. It's hard to do that where you can see it because you keep it up here. So I went down just one thread above where I came up. And I know it looks like a jumble, but it's not. I'm holding this pretty taut. And then I let it go right at the end. And you've got your little knot there. Okay? And I'm going to work my way around doing that. I'll show you a few more because I know that this is hard for some people. I actually am not good at colonial knots because I'm so used to doing French knots. I really practiced French knots early on. So, grab it, hold it taut. If you're left-handed, this is going to be a mirror image. You go around your needle twice with it, and then go back down through the linen or the Aida if you're using Aida, which are not for this learning stitches, but on something else. I go down one thread over or up from where I came up, just so I have something to anchor my knot and pull it through. Now that's 4. They all look pretty good. Now, French knots are never exactly the same, and that's the beauty. And if you think about things in nature, flowers and things like that, they're never exactly the same. They're never exactly symmetrical. And I personally think that's the beauty. I think things that look a little bit, just a little bit of variance, just look more natural to me. Okay. And you see I'm pulling that over and away and keeping it pretty taut. And sooner or later, one of these is going to mess up and I'm going to have to redo it. That is just the way the cookie crumbles. Now I'm carrying threads on the back of this like crazy just because I want to show you without, you know, taking so much time to run it under. IRL, in real life, I would run that thread under on the back. I wouldn't be carrying it around like I am, but that just makes the videos longer. Okay. And I think this has kind of a medieval look to it. I really love this look. So this is an alternative to beads. And okay, you're asking me why do I wrap it twice? Well, that's a big debate in the needlework world. With a single strand thread, so that one looks a little large, but I'm leaving it. With a single strand thread, I need, that's the size knot that I need, really. And so that's why I wrap it twice. Now here's the other reason, because that's how I was taught. And there are lots of people in the needlework world who tell you that you only ever wrap a French knot twice, ever. And if you need a bigger knot, you use a bigger thread. And I agree with that. I think wrapping it, you know, several times, it just gets unwieldy and it starts to look not finished, not nice. And so I only ever wrap the needle twice when I'm making a French knot, ever. And I'm not saying you can't break that rule. I'm saying that's the way I do it. That is the way I was taught. I admit it. I challenge things that I'm taught a lot, and I try other things, but I do think that this is the way it looks best. And it doesn't matter what size thread I'm using. I only wrap it twice. If I need a bigger knot, I use a bigger thread. Or I use 2 strands, you know, something like that. So that's how I change the size of the knot. Because you see the knots get they're a little wild anyway. They're their own little children. It's like raising children. They're all just a little bit different. You can give them the same love and the same nurture and the same care and the same approach, and they all come out just a little bit different. Says the person who doesn't have any kids, but I have lots of siblings and nieces and nephews. But you see, that's really pretty, I think. I likes it. So keep it that way. But that's why I wrap it twice. I really believe, I agree with all my teachers, and I've had many people say that this is just the best way to make a French knot. And maybe that's why I don't hate French knots, because I do it consistently. Like that every time. And you see, I haven't had one yet that I've had to pull through and redo, but I will. I mean, it just happens. But you see, I am coming up in one spot and going down one thread over. And it doesn't matter if you go up or over. Which way you choose will make your knot look more or less centered. Because I'm going up one thread, it's actually making them look centered on this because of the way that this design is kind of laid out. And I'm probably going to run out of thread here before I get all my knots done. But I hope this makes you feel a little bit better about French knots. I actually really like French knots. Now, would I want to do 1,000 of them to make a sheep that's all French knots? And I've seen people do it? No. Would I want to do beads to do that? No. I wouldn't. What would I do? I would use whisper thread. And I would make stitches. And I would fuzz up the thread. Because the whisper thread, it comes from Rainbow Gallery and it's kind of fuzzy. And I would make my sheep's fur look like fur. I would not put 1,000 knots in there. But it's very beautiful when it's done. I've seen people do it and it's lovely. It's really pretty. So you've sat here and watched me make a bunch of knots. And we're just about done. I've got, after this one, 4 more. So I'm probably going to have to rethread when I have to rethread will break, and I won't make you watch the last part of it. It is hard to do when you get your thread shorter, so I wouldn't, unless you're feeling really brave, because I think that's it for me. I'm gonna have to rethread. So I'm gonna run this under, and you see it doesn't look terrible on the back, even though I carry it all over the place. It's no big deal. And you saw how waffled through those threads because they're kind of loose. Okay, so I'm gonna rethread, and I'm gonna finish out these little French knots here, and then this will be done. And I'm gonna leave the little broken parts empty like that because, okay, and if you read what Jeanette wrote, she talks about giving the eye space to rest, and that's what happens in the margin here. So when you've got this margin between the threads and you have this little broken spot here, you have a place for your eye to rest, so that you can actually see and appreciate and view the design rather than everything just be kind of jumbled. And we've done it both ways, and they're both beautiful, but this is a really nice approach, and I like it. So when I'm going to put a knot there, I'm probably going to put one here, and then this guy's finished. This one is going to be done. And then we'll flip to the other end, and I'll do some other fun stuff with some different threads. So, you know, that's the reason for the margin, and that's the reason I'm leaving these little spots blank. Also, I think they look kind of like eyes. I think it's kind of neat. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the French knot lesson. We'll do more of that. So I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so I wanted to show you kind of what I decided to do on the other end. I'm actually using some overdyed flosses and some colors that I really like, and they kind of go well with what we've done before. Now this thread up here was a sulky thread, I believe, and a pearl number 12 sulky thread. And what I did here is I pulled in a color that I thought kind of went with that, and a green that goes with some of our other greens that we've used in the sulky line. These are Gentle Art limited edition, and what Gentle Art does with the limited edition is they usually try some colors out in a limited edition, and maybe they made them specifically for a designer request or something like that, and then later these guys get names and they come back and they have a named color. And I always buy the limited editions at market because I just find them to be beautiful, and we usually give them away in our Jack Stash kits or something like that, but I just really enjoy trying out the colors, and these were two of my favorites. And so you can see I used 2 strands. This is a 6-strand floss, and I used 2 ply of the strand, and I started with this green one, and I started up here the same as we did before, but instead of going across, I went down in a diagonal. And so when I finished here, I came back underneath this next to last leg, and I counted down 4 threads, and I did the first little baby stitch of the next motif, which covers 1 thread, and that still gave me my 3-thread margin. And then I stitched that motif, and then I came back a leg and counted down 4 threads and did the first little baby thread of the next motif, came across, and I just kept doing that. And so I did that little kind of diagonal column of the green, and then I ended off, and then I came back up here and I started beside it, and I did this kind of burnt orange or autumn color, and I did the same thing. I came down on a diagonal row, and then I came back over here and I filled in over here. Now I still need 1 green stitch right here, which I'll come back and catch that, and half of a stitch here. So it looks like half a stitch here and half a stitch here, and this might be finished, and I'll see how I do that at the end. Sometimes on this second part I do full compensations, and sometimes I don't. I just let the design be what it is. So I'm getting ready to start my next diagonal column of this green thread, and to do that I'm going to count over the same, I'm going to skip the same 4 threads from this last stitch here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to start with this baby thread, baby stitch, right? It's just 1 little tiny leg, so that covers 1 thread. The next one covers 3. It's the same exact motif that we did before. The next one covers 5, and you see it's just as easy to do with 2 strands as it is with 1. And I just love the way the colors change on these overdyed threads. Now the next one is the broken stitch, and so it's like 3, skip a thread and do 3. And you see I'm still going from bottom to top on all of this because I'm moving down my linen. The next one, we're going to decrease the size. It's 5. The next leg is 3. And the next one is 1. Okay? And now I'm going to do my little swing back here and come down diagonally. So I'm actually coming down underneath this next to last leg, this one. And I'm going to count down 4 threads because I want a 3 thread margin and my first stitch covers 1 thread. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that should also line me up starting 4 threads over from the last stitch of this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and it does. So we're in the right place, and we're just going to carry on and do that same motif again. Okay? So I'm going to carry on and finish out this little grouping, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about what we're going to do in between these. So, see you in a minute. Okay, we're back, and you can see that I finished, stitching all the motifs through here. And now I want to go back and kind of decorate in between these stitches. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the kind of reddish autumn colored thread. And the beads are all going to be this bead here. They're all going to be the same color bead. It's all pretty beads. We've used this one before. But I think I'm going to switch up the thread that I attach it with around in here to give it some interest. And I'll start with this copper colored thread, and then I'll jump over and I'll use the green thread. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to break that apart in here. And I'm not sure if I'm going to put a bead everywhere or not because there'll be a lot of beads. But anyway, I'm going to play with it, and I am going to do the stitch underneath. So if you look at Jeanette's pattern book and you look at page 25, she describes attaching that bead, and she's actually got a little stitch underneath the bead that she attached. And so I'm going to put a little cross stitch underneath. I'm going to attach it with a cross stitch, and I will show you how to do that. I'll show you on this first one. Okay, so I'm going to start here with the first one, and I just kind of want to center it between these stitches. So it's going to be kind of hard to do actually because the way there's 3 threads between. So you almost have to be off, or you could make an elongated cross, and so maybe that's what I will do. It'll be kind of funny looking, but we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to start right beside 1 thread over from the point on this, and then I'm going to pick up my bead, and I'm going to lay down 1 thread over from the point on this one. So it's going to be kind of a long cross here. Yeah, I like that. Okay. And then when I come on the other side of this where I started, you can see right here 1 thread over from this point. I'm going to go through the belly of this bead, and this is important if you want your beads to lay nice and straight. And then I'm going to go down, kind of loosen up your bead, and you can see 1 thread over from the point on that, and then you can tighten it up when you take it down like that. So you can't really see the thread underneath, so maybe I won't switch it back and forth because you're not able to see it much even with an elongated stitch. So I just think it's going to be too many beads if I put a bead in every one of these openings. Too many for me anyway. So I think I might jump down here and do another one. I may just kind of do this space in here back and forth up through here, but you can do it however you want. Okay, so I'm going to show you another one. So I came up right beside that. I'm going to grab my bead. I'm going to go down 1 thread beside that point. And I'm using 2 strands of floss here just because I want it to be secure, because I you know, I roll this piece up and it gets abused a little bit because it is a teaching piece. You see how this bead now is at an angle and this one is straight? When I come up through the belly of this bead and go back down here beside this one, it straightens it up. See, that looks great. So I'm going to kind of carry on just back and forth through here. And when I get to the end, if I want more beads, I'll add more beads. And, you know, I don't think I'll be taking any off, though, because that's a little bit harder to do. Yeah, I kind of like that. I might jump up here on this one. I'm just going to be random. But, yeah, do it however you like. Okay, so there's not a place for me to, you know, kind of figure out where to go up here. So I think that this was 1, 2, 3 between. So I'm going to come over 2 threads and then up 1, 2, 3 and go down. And that should put me in the right spot. And I know where to come up at there. Go through here. Now to come back down up here, I'm just going to skip 2 threads and go back down. And that makes it have the same spacing as before. And so this time I'm going to come back down through here. I may come all the way down here. This time I'm back up. I don't know. I'm going to play around with it. So you play around with yours and figure out what you like the look of. And if you don't like beads, you know, you can do French knots. I showed you that earlier. You can do a combination of the two if you'd like. You can, you know, do whatever you like. You can use a completely different color bead so that it gives it a different look. You could use a smaller bead. Like this bead that I'm using is a pretty big bead, but you could use a little seed bead, which is more like what Jeanette used with hers. I just really like the color of these beads, and I'm kind of staying in this color theme over here a little bit. And so in a sea and sunset kind of mood these days, because this blue-green reminds me of the ocean. I lived in St. Croix for a little while before I opened the shop, and they just had the most beautiful oceans. There's a few places in the world like that. Bermuda's another one. I'm just wanting to make sure I get to the right spot on this, where to end this. I'm going to start it here. And then I love the kind of sunset look of, I think of it more as, you know, like a fall here in the mountains kind of look with these copper colors. Yeah, so you can see I'm pretty random there. And there's a lot of beads on there. So I'm going to kind of go back up over here, and I may decide I need to drop some other beads in somewhere else. So I won't make you watch all that. I'll show you when it's done. I hope you have enjoyed this lesson very much. I'm going to show you what Jeanette's looks like on the actual stitched model. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below for me. And we will be back soon with block number 10, which is also a really fun one. Thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate it. Have fun. Bye.